9 more days. 9 more days and there's just the engine sitting out like that. We're good under pressure. We've got more stuff in, and this is the stuff that helps finish getting the engine finished. Good old full function engineering. Give them a little shout out like that. Hooked us up big time with a lot of the components necessary to make that engine run. I am still aiming for, today's Tuesday, still aiming for a fire up on Friday, like straight up exhaust shooting out of the back of the turbo type of fire up. Here is their trigger kit for the FC, which is the same type of front cover, not as sick as the billet one. So this is what covers up that hole. It's an awkward looking hole on the side of that front cover, and that's the wheel. Let's see what's here. This is a solution and both the challenge to the next part of this build. This is the trigger wheel sensor. My dear friend Nodder from Built to Apex doesn't know I'm about to drop this off and be like, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me show you. On a normal 2-rotor front cover, there are bolts right here and here that holds on to this. The sensor goes like this, and then the spiny trigger wheel goes right there. Life is good, the world moves on. This is the Billet Boss alternator bracket, and it also plugs in right there. Problem number one, they are cohabitating right in that spot right there. And that does not make for a happy setup. In theory, I could run it like this, put some spacers on the rest of them, and then the alternator is that much closer to the front steering rack. That's a possibility. Or Built to Apex makes an alternator bracket, and we can have them extended out here and then replicate what's going on right there. Not gonna work all the way out here because the sensor has to get as close as possible to the wheel, but we're sharing a lot of party space right in this area. I do want to point out that if I didn't know Nodder and I wasn't this close to him, this would be another month of just, well, engine's done. There's nothing I can do with this car. God, I love being near these guys. Oh, this is an oil pedestal, and as you can imagine, the good old oil filter sits on top of this. What is this useful for? Let me show you. So right here on a normal rotary engine, we'll open it up for your viewing pleasure, is where the oil filter goes. Well, there is actually an oil pedestal as well for that one, but it's not nearly as functional as this. So oil comes in from here, from the oil coolers, and then is filtered through here and then goes through this hole and is dispersed to the rest of the engine. This hole, on the other hand, is what helps build pressure as it goes down through here. Oil has to come up through here. This is one of the most confusing parts of the oil system. Oil comes into the engine, is filtered, and then goes through here and then is dispersed to the engine, and then excess oil is just dumped back into the pan. That has been so confusing to me for the longest time because I'm like, why are there two holes? What do they do? We've got two sensors right here, well, NTP ports, one for pressure sensor, one for temperature sensor. So our oil, we keep it on lockdown. We know exactly what's going on with it at all times. I think this is a capable of 6 AN line for feeding more oil to something. In a aftermarket setup, you actually end up feeding the front iron separately. This is probably going to stay blocked off because this is a very stock setup. But you'll see on my 3-rotor, we were literally feeding everything separately. It was all just kind of coming in from the side and all going into all of these. So this oil passage here was blocked off. So it'll sit something like that. The biggest, best feature of all this is the stock cars have a banjo bolt right here, which it still is compatible with. So banjo bolt's one of those that go around and then the bolt hole goes through it and oil seeps around the banjo bolt. So here is the banjo bolt. And what you can see is I actually tapped the banjo bolt and put the temp sensor in from the top. And it worked, kinda. But you can see that oil was definitely seeping around it slowly. And why have oil leaks when you can choose to not have oil leaks? That was the solution that I did on a stock 2-rotor / FD solution. We can make that much cleaner because guess what? This plugs right into the oil pedestal, no questions asked. Full disclosure, Full Function did in fact sponsor me for their light and fuel rails. check these out. This little baby right here is probably cut. I'm gonna make myself sound stupid, but this is probably cut on a 5-axis or at least a 4-axis CNC machine. The reason I can tell that is because of the toolpath markings. That is very, very sexy. The previous generation of these, I'll show you these, and they are very functional, square, got the job done beautifully. That's what's made all the horsepower. But why not look even sexier? This is definitely not sexy because we are pulling some crazy hours. Crazy all-nighters, getting weird shit done. I've definitely knocked some time off of my life. This little guy here is the primary rail. Here, feel how light this is. That's pretty light.
Pretty heavy, honestly.
Whoa. There is the secondary rail. Oh, man, that is so light. So secondary rail here, this goes on the lower intake manifold. And again, you can see the toolpath markings. I had a hilarious, not miscommunication, but because I don't want to give them a bad name, but excessive lower intake manifold. They wouldn't ship to a different address because I was going to have Charles, CJ Motorsports, make secondary rails for it. Huge thanks to Charles, another big innovator in the aftermarket for RX-7s. They made it so difficult that by the time I finally got it figured out with a payment method, Excessive sold all the ones that were in stock and they had them back ordered. And I was honestly a little like, what the hell? I didn't hold this order back. I don't have 4 secondary injectors. So when we go to make this motor 1,000 horsepower and do all that craziness and see what happens and ruin my life, we're gonna be upgrading these. Now this, I am Facebook friends with the owner. His name's Paul Yaw. I paid full retail, Paul. full retail. I always do because I can bitch if they don't work, and you know what? They do work. And I'm not looking for a sponsorship because I like being able to bitch. ID injectors are very solid for non-race, and by that I mean me type of applications. I don't own a race team, but I'm sure these would do fine, but I can't speak personally on those. What you can see here is 1300X. These are my primaries. Why 1300s? E85. And then these don't look familiar. Maybe they are familiar. They're the same as these. So I have secondary rails of 1700X. I love getting as small of injectors as possible for my needs because of having granular control over the injector amounts. These are my primaries on the 3-rotor. They were for pump gas, and that's a 1050X. I don't know if you guys know this, but one of the very first videos Jarrett and I did, we were like, okay, we need to make the channel look as cool as the content is. I hated to admit it, but building these was like Legos. Like we had all these hats and shit.
You would like them being like different colors.
I like them like that. And I mean, I'm not like obnoxiously different color guy. That looks pretty sick. This is all fine and dandy. This is what I'm gonna start assembling on the motor. Intake manifolds, getting them prepped for all of this sort of shit. And moving forward, I'm gonna be visiting Built to Apex tomorrow because we've got some machining issues. We got a cool solution for the hydraulic throwout bearing. Sick, we can use the stock Corvette throwout bearing. While I'm doing all of this though, I got radiators installed. We'll be filming that throughout the rest of this video. Jarrett's going to be setting up and shipping out the first of our, not these shirts, the first of our Corvette shirts. Let's go over to Jarrett for the weather. Thanks, Rob. Needless to say, I am not an adult mentally. We need to clean up this area because this is where shirts are going to be. So there is somebody out there that this information is going to help greatly. I've been working on cleaning up these little adapters here. M18, we'll get right to the point. M18 is the connector for the front cover oil return, or excuse me, oil feed, and banjo bolt on the pedestal right there. Both of them are M18s. In this case, you're gonna see the fat stubby one. That one is a AN10 and AN8. So those are just thinking about doing this sort of stuff. This is the type of adapter you're going to need. Contrary to this, I come from a world where these dashes on the side of a piece mean that they're reverse thread. Ignore that. That's really annoying because I didn't ignore that and I stripped the threading out of the piece that this was in. So what you're seeing here is this piece, this one in the front cover, which is the oil going out, pumped out. That's gonna go to the front cover. We'll just gently set this in there right now. No washer or anything like that at the moment. On the rear, I'm gonna go ahead and take that one. So on this oil pedestal right here, you're gonna see, again, M18 leading the charge, and of course tighten it and so on. This is gonna be dash 8 in. So oil system's gonna feed out from here, go to another M10, so it's gonna be a long 5/8 inch thick diameter hose, and then this beautiful setup down here, you can barely see it in the dark. Let's pull this up. Oh, those are dash 10. So dash 10 from the front oil cover to the in and out of the oil cooler here. Like Abel said earlier, yesterday's video, maybe run a separate oil cooler just to really keep things all sexy. And then that all goes back in, sadly through a slightly smaller one, but not really much need there to have anything larger than that dash 8. That's the oil system in a nutshell. We start getting really crazy with the coolant system, which is actually dash 16 in and out. And I'm just gonna adapt those to hoses. And the reason why, let me show you the whole thing I've drawn out for all this. All right, this is my magic diagram I spent hours on, legitimately on, is there's the oil front cover coming out, 10 AN to the radiator, which is also the oil cooler, 10 AN back out to 8 on the back of the oil pedestal. That's a nice cooling of the oil, but then we also do have the turbo being fed oil and returned. Those lines were provided by Turbone or Turbo Source. Those are all good. The coolant gets a way crazier. We've got hot and cold, and then I've got to get those to the radiator, but then there's the electric water pump, but then also the overflow, which has to go right here. So there's the water pump that's just on the cold side. A lot of those pieces are this sort of connector, just a normal rubber hose connector, which would be nice to do 16 AN all across the whole thing. But even this kit comes with its own temp sensor, and that's got these as well. So I think I'm going to keep it simple for the moment. This isn't the 4-rotor. The 4-rotor is going to be a spare, no expense, as you already know, build, and it will probably have everything AN. But this does have the ability to adapt to that in the future. Obviously, hoses running from this and back and forth from the radiator, that sensor for this little self-controller, and then this overflow tank, which I bought new, also is important as well. I think one of the only janky things that I have to do, and it really is fine, I personally know it's okay, is see these little nipples here? One goes to the overflow, obviously to burp the system, but the other one I think is what I'm going to do. This is the janky part of my build. There's a coolant feed line here and a coolant feed line here. Now these, mind you, those are both, coolant has gone into the engine and warmed up, and they're halfway hot or mostly hot by the time they get back here. So this is not cold by any means. It's warm enough or cold enough, in my opinion, to then feed the turbo. It can heat that up even more, and then the turbo dumps that all the way back to the other nipple on the radiator. Weird, but there are places for everything, and I think that'll work fine. Before we start working on the intake manifolds and all the block-off valves and all that sort of crap that we have to do here, I'm gonna go check in on Jarrett. Let's see what he's up to.
Super exciting stuff.
He is getting the label printer all ready for all of the people. This is very, very exciting. We even have our thing to weigh all the drugs out.
They weigh 4.0 ounces exactly.
Am I right on that? Yeah, I guessed that. Okay, Jarrett, let's go ahead and tell what person number 1 gets.
An Apex seal?
That is correct. Person number 1 gets an Apex seal. This is literally one of these seals used in the 3-rotor to win all of its records and all that sort of craziness. Whether you want it or not, you're getting a chunk of metal in your bag. That's what you get for being absolutely insane and ordering before it was even open. We spent, what 15 seconds? Maybe.
No, we opened it for like 3 minutes.
Opened it for like 3 minutes to test, and he had placed an order. So you, my man, are amazing, and you get a used but good Apex seal from the 3-rotor. With the intake manifold being the most iconic part of a rotary engine to me, I wanted to make sure we stayed as stock as possible looking. Of course, there are some other better flowing upgrades, but this is just too cool to be ignored. The only downside to the stock setup is there are a lot of emissions things that a race car like this will not need. A lot of things that need to be blocked off. As you can see there, these have always bothered me because they actually just pass through, but it looks like you have a boost leak. That is not the case. Emissions control, EGR valves, a lot of features that we do not need. And thankfully, one of my buddies sent me the actual plates, the block-off valve plate sets right here. So we've got some of them already on here, but we're gonna take these off, clean them all up, put the plates on. That's not that one. Let's try this one. Put these plates on the pieces that are just not going to be used and move forward. There we go. Not only do we have to put these on here, but we also have to take out the secondary butterfly valves. That all has to come out now. I'm actually gonna take the set that are on there off because those are pretty dirty. Oh, bent. That's why that one's bent. I have to pull these longer studs out anyway. that one definitely goes into that spot. Once I remove the secondary butterfly valves, this blocks that section off right there. All right, so we can only print 20 shipping labels at a time, but it's still impressive. We've got how many orders? I think we've got like 300 orders in one day.
You guys are crazy.
Yeah, you guys are nuts. It's kind of neat because we can actually automate all of the international shipping here too. Well, Jarrett works on that. I'm gonna take these kind of lower tier block off plates and take them off. I'm also gonna take these off. They did go out of their way to block them with some sort of goo. They're just pass-throughs, but I'm gonna rip these off with vice grips and then actually just adhesive or JB weld the holes themselves there for a nice clean look. I'm also going to take the actual studs off. They're a little tall. I don't think the threads go all the way down, so I'm going to just put normal bolts on here, little baby 10 mil bolts. That's a pretty gratifying little pop. There we are. Okay, clean all of this off. Fucking stay still, you piece of shit. There we go. Of course, off camera, they slide off almost perfectly. There we go. There. There we go. So I'm not gonna mess with too many of these inner ones because it's the outer part that makes such a pretty appearance, but I'm gonna pop off the stock diffuser kit for the RX-7. Those might come in handy for somebody or some OEM sort of situation. They don't need to be on mine. Okay, do not want to mess up the injector boss. That part first. I don't care so much about the actual plastic. That's not part of my concern. I do not want to scrape up the metal. Okay, be very gentle. Still some remnants of a destroyed O-ring, and everything else is in good shape. Okay, both sides, we are good. So with all of this crap off of there, I'm now gonna clean this whole thing up, make it look a lot better. The way we're just gonna just clean it up nice and generically. I was gonna polish this, but at this point, it's just more the nice general aesthetic of it being brushed. That's gonna turn out pretty nice, but make sure you're wearing a respirator for this sort of shit. Tons of aluminum in your body isn't that good. All right, I'm gonna work on the rest of this and show you the end result. Trying to use as much surface area as possible because I'm not trying to angle it or put weird pressure because of my hands. And I think that's paying off. So one of my favorite small details I just did is cleaned up the casting with a cutoff saw, just right here. Cleaned that whole area up and then buffed it out a little bit more with the wire wheel. Obviously there were areas that I just didn't want to get a sharp angle and then just gouge it, so I just went flat and cleaned that up area. Because this whole area right here, you see, if you're looking at the engine bay, you're the camera, you're gonna look down this way. And so I want this whole area to really shine. That lower intake manifold already looks a million times better. So now it's time to work over the upper. I'm gonna do the same thing with the casting here. It's always bothered me. I'm gonna clean this side up and then take the butterfly valves out. Unfortunately, somebody attempted these already, all 4 of them. So I'm just gonna have to drill them out. There's not really a way around it. I'm not trying to save any of this stuff, so let's just get it done. Okay, so the head of the bolt fell off. Fortunately, that is a different metal, softer metal, brass pieces there. There we go. Easily done. So with all 4 of those drilled all the way through, that gives this the perfect opportunity to slide all the way back out. All right, so I cleaned this up again, same basic process. I'm gonna brush this whole piece. I had to clean off the work area before I show you the final product. So clean, it's unbelievable. I'm so happy with how they turned out. Nice brushed aluminum look, kind of easy to maintain, easy to get dirty. I used a little bit of brake cleaner so you can see the orange right there that comes off as well. So I just went out to Lowe's and it was a pain in the ass, but I found these. They're like collared, it's nice. They have like basically the washer built into them and they're shiny. So I got enough of those to take care of the fact that I'm missing the sickest bolts, well, I should say nuts, that this car ever had. I know you can find these elsewhere. Just gotta admit that maybe these aren't meant for the car anymore. I'm gonna put these on the front though. They're gonna go here, and then the rest of them just won't have the cap on there. Got those. Couldn't find, what I was looking for was the oil metering pump. Couldn't find that at Lowe's. Couldn't find any of these at Lowe's. So it's time to go to an actual car hardware place to get bolts. All in all, this is looking really sexy. There's the full function block off for the old school timing system. And then here is the new trigger wheel. I believe this is a 36-2, whatever the case may be. There should be an empty space right there. And of course, with that, we'll set that gently there, is a sensor for detecting magnetic pulses. What's really funny is it is actually so strong that it sticks to it. You know, that's working right there. So this ultimately ends up plugging in over here. And you can see it's pretty close because they want to touch. So I'm going to put this here and I'll show you what my next challenge is. Those of you with sharp eyes will have noticed that the alternator bracket goes in this same spot right here, making for a little bit of a backup. I'm not exactly sure. One of my friends, David, came by and looked at this and talked about clearancing these. That's a possibility. I might have to lean on Nodder from Built to Apex to finish what I've started, the mess I've made here. There's also the option of putting this on the outside of here and extending these pieces and so on. But what starts getting really weird is I had to flip this pulley inward, which is nice because it's more compact, but I had to flip that inward. Now I'm concerned about where the alternator is going to sit in comparison to that pulley. So somehow I was able to get the entire system to sit on top of the full function bracket, which then has the billet boss bracket on top of that. But you can see my first issue is here. Do the pulleys actually line up? Because remember, I had to swap that pulley backwards, more of an FC instead of an FD sort of setup. And it does appear this has one extra rib, just like us men, and it does seem to line up. So you can see, generally speaking, that a belt is going to work on there. That is nice. The problem is the holes now don't line up because I had to flip this pulley around. So I'll have to drill it or get an FC one. Here comes the second issue. This is now in the direct path of this pulley to this pulley. There's going to be some sort of belt between the two, and at this completely lax spot coming off of that bottom of that pulley, touching the bottom of this pulley, there is contact right there. We got a little bit of an issue right here. Obviously on the top sides, no worries there. That all fits fine. And worse yet, this alternator is meant to go higher up. We've got a little bit of an issue to deal with. Thankfully, I'm heading out to Built to Apex tomorrow to deal with a couple other issues, and this should be able to be resolved. So now that we've got all of these things in place with the motor, ultimately tomorrow's video, we're gonna have to take this back to Nodder because we've got the oil pan coming, we've got the solutions for all this being figured out, life is good. But now that we've got all of the lines figured out, let's go ahead and finally put the radiator in this car. So one of the greatest pieces of advice Abel gave me was the idea of running the oil cooler on here and an external oil cooler, because the combination of those gives us idling cool and at speed cool. So both of those, very, very exciting. Something I called DeWitt about is this version is lowered so that way we can run the intercooler piping over it and still keep everything else stock.
Thanks, you're struggling?
I am struggling. It's gonna sit somewhere, actually, it's gonna sit somewhere right here, and then that plastic piece goes over it, which we'll have to modify for the intake pipe. And yeah, that's a pretty heavy duty thing. We'll have to run the 10AN lines to the oil and all that. You guys have to bear with me because this is daily content. We're just trying to get it out as we get this out. But I'm hoping, actually, I kind of have to be. It's not even hope. Friday, maybe Sunday, we're gonna have a first fire of the motor. That soon. Even though some of you guys are giving me shit that, hey, let's get it running already. You can see that this doesn't even look like it should run. Each of these days has kind of like a theme of the day. Tomorrow's theme of the day, as we'll be dressing accordingly, is fabrication. And then the following day is wiring. And then the following day is hoses. For Jarrett, for me, it's hose.